Spaulding's Museum of Monsters and Madmen.
The Firefly Trilogy is one of the newer franchises from the Horror Hall of Fame. Started by Rob Zombie in 2003, this franchise follows the Firefly family, a group of psychopaths almost like a cult, similar to Charles Manson in the cases similar to him. The films follow Otis, who is the leader of this family and cult, Baby, who is his sister and who follows him throughout these adventures, if you want to call them that, Captain Spaulding, perhaps the most iconic figure from this series, played by Sid Haig, the late, great Sid Haig, a clown who joins the posse, also a part of the family and who causes a lot of havoc and mayhem, and fried chicken. And later on, in Three from Hell, the Wolfman, who is Otis's brother and who fills the spot of Captain Spaulding after he gets the cut in the third film. The films are very gritty, very grimy, and they remind me a lot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from the 1970s. They have a grindhouse type feel to them, and they're very different, I have to say. Even from the original film, House of a Thousand Corpses, many of the producers didn't want to continue funding Rob Zombie's work because it was just so bizarre. But I respect the immense work and talent put into these films, and I do think they deserve a spot in the Horror Hall of Fame. So today, let's talk about the Firefly Trilogy. Beginning in 2003, House of a Thousand Corpses was the first film released in this franchise. Rob Zombie was just a young filmmaker at the time and had no films done. Universal approached him and gave him the money to make his very first movie, which would end up being House of a Thousand Corpses. The film is similar to a Tarantino one, though far grittier and having a lot of quippy lines, some that stick and some that don't, but overall the tone is very much similar. The main film after that follows a group of kids who are backpacking across the country, trying to find some off-road tourist attractions when, of course, they meet Spaulding, and he tells them about Dr. Satan. They go to a creepy, sketchy house where they meet Sherry Moon Zombie, of course, Baby Firefly, and they get into a whole big mess when they meet Otis, who is kind of the figurehead of this franchise. Otis is akin to Charles Manson. He has a bunch of people underneath him, and they listen to him as he shares his opinions and his message to them, and they kind of follow and do whatever he tells them to do. From there, they attack the young kids, and it's left down to only a few survivors as to who will make it out of the House of a Thousand Corpses alive. This original film feels very much like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, both in terms of its style and its substance. A few kids we don't know a lot about get into a house where there's some bad stuff going on. The very gritty nature of it and the weird editing choices make this film stand out amongst other films that came out at the time. While this film is entertaining, of course, I do think it drags a bit in the middle act, with the first and final acts being the most intriguing, and that middle section being kind of a lull. We don't get a lot of character growth in it, and it feels kind of stale in the middle. While I think usually the first films in franchises are the best, in the case of the Firefly Trilogy, I actually think House of a Thousand Corpses is my least favorite. Not that it's a bad movie, but I think the other two are a little more intriguing, at least for my tastes. Moving on to The Devil's Rejects, my favorite film in the series, and a lot of fans' favorite film too, we follow the Firefly family as they have a shootout following the events of the original film. They have this shootout, and eventually they find themselves to this dingy motel where they take some hostages in order to get away from the police. Of course, in doing so, they get the police on their trail again. And we have the sheriff who is desperate in finding these people, tracking them down, and killing them in what turns out to be a revenge plot. The sheriff at one point even hires some hitmen, one of which played by veteran actor Danny Trejo, to take care of the Firefly family. This film, unlike House of a Thousand Corpses, is, it's less horror-based and really more of like an action horror film. It feels like a revenge movie, like an exploitation film. But I do like it when it does have horror sequences in it too. The motel scene and the garbage dump scene in particular are very heavily inspired by horror and of course the Charles Manson case from back in the day. I really appreciate the theming of the movie. I really like that it captures the energy from House of a Thousand Corpses and adds to it. And the sheriff in this film is perhaps one of my favorite characters in the franchise because he really adds a kind of balance to the complete psychopathic evil of the Firefly family with this kind of justice-driven authority that we get later on in the film. While it doesn't completely work out for him, I do think it has an interesting payoff in the end, and we are left with nothing at the end for 14 years. And then, after those 14 years, we of course get 3 from Hell. 3 from Hell follows, again, the Firefly family, though Captain Spaulding is given the lethal injection at the beginning of the movie while the Fireflies are in prison, and he dies. Though we do get a really great scene with Captain Spaulding at the beginning of the movie, though he's not in it for the remainder. Instead, Otis's brother, the Wolfman character, does appear, and while he's, of course, not Sid Haig, I do think that the actor and the character that he portrays are a good fill-in for Captain Spaulding. Basically, the film is how they escape from prison and then run into Danny Trejo's son, Danny Trejo's the actor, the character, his son, and the plot is very similar to The Devil's Rejects, where this son, basically being, like the new sheriff, I guess, has to confront the 3 from Hell and take them down to cause a revenge plot for his father and his death. So this film is kind of a hybrid of the two. It takes more of the gritty horror from House of a Thousand Corpses and mixes it with that action that I liked a lot from The Devil's Rejects. While I don't think it's quite as good as The Devil's Rejects, and the ending was a little bit of a letdown for me, I do think that overall, the film is entertaining in many scenes. I really like the cinematography of it too. It's very gritty and all over the place, but it adds to the oddball nature, I guess you could say, of this trio straight from Hell. They're also far more chaotic in this movie, and a lot more sinister too. I like some of the sequences where they do the bat craziest stuff that you could think of, and they do it completely seriously and insanely, and it just adds to the characters. The way the film wraps up opens it to more possibilities for this series, and right now I don't know if this Firefly Trilogy will remain as so. Perhaps in the future we'll see even more films out of Rob Zombie in this continuation, and I would be fine with it. I've watched a lot of interviews with Rob Zombie, and he seems like a really cool guy. He appreciates classic horror, and you can see that throughout these movies with references to Bela Lugosi and the Three Stooges and the like. I especially like how he adds music to his films. While I may not be the biggest fan of some of the selections, some of them actually being his music, which I actually really like the opening sequence to House of a Thousand Corpses, I appreciate that his passion for music and film comes together in these movies, and you can see that from his perspective, a writer and director, he does a really fine job, and I love the passion behind it. Even if I don't agree with all of the choices that he makes, I respect immensely the writer-director combo because it shows me that the horror mind behind the film has a clear vision of what they want to accomplish. And I think Rob Zombie did a pretty good job making this iconic trilogy of films from the 2000s. Unfortunately, with the passing of Sid Haig, Captain Spaulding won't return to any of the films, but I do think the films still have a lot of potential following especially Baby and Otis. There's a lot that could be offered and still on the table. What do you think about the Firefly Trilogy? Are you a fan of these films? Are you not? Let me know down in the comments below. And thank you for watching this over-review. I'll see you in the next video, and remember, for all things Halloween, this is hauntformer.
Ride my famous murder ride. Most of all, don't forget to take home some of my tasty fried chicken. Ha ha! It just tastes so damn good.